Всем привет, меня зовут Михаил Светов, спасибо, что подключились к эфире. У меня в гостях американский публицист Ричард Hanania, и поговорим мы про международные отношения, про США, про Россию, про войну на Украине и Израиле, и про политику вукизма, которая в значительной степени определяет американскую внешнюю политику сегодня в том числе. Разговор будет на английском, я надеюсь, в ближайшие дни мы сделаем субтитры на русском языке тоже. Hi, Richard, it's a pleasure to have you on my show, and I'm just going to introduce you in English as well quickly. Richard Hanania is the president of the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology and author of two great fascinating books, Public Choice Theory and The Illusion of Grand Strategy and The Origin of Woke. Richard, thank you for coming to my show. It's a pleasure to get to know you.
Good to be here. Thanks, Mikhail.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to talk mostly on international politics, but I'm going to touch American politics as well, because I feel that whatever happens inside the US influences the American foreign policy as well. And it's actually, when I was preparing for the show, I have two of your books, and I actually felt like there was more in common with the topics that you touched on, even though they seem quite different, because I think that absence of the grand strategy in American foreign policy today is actually a result of this conundrum that you have inside the US, where you can't really decide what US should be in 2024 or 23 in the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, the books. I'm sorry. Was that a question? Or?
No. It was okay. It was just like a conversation starter, which failed. But I guess the question was: do you feel like the reason why America was unable to have this grand foreign strategy is precisely because that your domestic policy, because tearing yourself apart on the domestic level?
It's probably has something to do with the general societal divisions. At the same time, it's also the nature of the American political system. We have a presidential system where the Congress officially declares war. The Congress distributes them after control of that, but in practice, the president basically runs foreign policy. The president's term limited. There's always elections going on. There is, it's an open society, so there's people can, they can buy influence. There's the media. There's people that can, lobby different government actors. So it's, probably has something to do with American political divisions, like the latest sort of culture war stuff that people think about. But I think it's probably mostly just the sort of the nature of the American system.
Yeah, but division of power is part of the American system since the very beginning. But it's only recently that America lost its vision and lost its understanding of what it's actually trying to achieve on the foreign side of affairs and domestic as well.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's not like something. It's not like something changed. It's just things stopped working.
Yeah, I mean, the American foreign policy it's been a confusion. I mean, there was a sort of an orientation towards the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, it's still the U.S. still had a role to play. It still had these commitments in various parts of the world, but it did not. It did not sort of have that core. I mean, people's visions of sort of the good life, at home, sort of influenced their foreign policy and what was, achievable. And people had different political ideas about different countries based on their own sort of parochial concerns. I think there's something to this. I think there's a sort of a deeper sort of connection between the books, in that they're both ways of thinking about government policy that is, that focuses on systems and, path dependency and unintended consequences rather than grand vision. I mean, the American foreign policy at this point is sort of an accident. It's a sort of like a Frankenstein monster of different parts being put together. And the civil rights regime, is also the same thing. Although they both have true believers and people trying to do different things. The reason they are the way they are is very sort of context specific, and they're both books that are heavy on history because you need to understand the history to know how we got here.
Yeah, but it's not just a failure of a vision; it's a failure of inspiration. Because like the reason the U.S. won the core is because it's not the tanks, it's not the nuclear weapons, it was not even the space race. It was the grand vision, of liberty, of equality before the law, of representation on the level of the government that won the culture war and the Cold War as a consequence. But now it feels like there is a failure to inspire, like thinking about the US and thinking about the American involvement in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Arab Spring, in Ukraine as well. What is it that the U.S. offers that makes that makes it attractive today? I think is a major problem, and and even on the Russian domestic level as well. Talking as a Russian and a libertarian, like even today, talking about the U.S. and the American foreign policies, we're actually talking about the America of 100 years ago, and not what it offers today, because it's not obvious what is it exactly that the U.S. offers.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that, because it seems like in many cases the U.S. can inspire people. It's often inspiring people in situations where American power can't do much. So in Hong Kong, when they were protesting against China, I mean, they were waving American flags. They were very inspired sort of by the idea of America. In the case of Ukraine, I think it really did inspire a lot of Ukrainians to think about, sort of the West, the European Union. They wanted to be close to America. We ended up not sort of, maybe Ukraine was in an impossible position, or maybe we didn't sort of, the critics of the war effort would say we didn't send them enough weapons or quickly enough, or we weren't, steadfast enough in their support. But there was, sort of inspiration. So I think compared to the alternative, when people are faced with invasion from Russia, or when people are faced with, Chinese communism coming down on them, I think the what America represents can be very strong. It's, the Muslim world doesn't want it. We've tried to force it on. We've tried to force it on the Muslim world. It doesn't inspire. It might, it seems that there was some inspiration for Iran. There was, this sort of liberal uprising against the regime. If you didn't take it, we didn't take advantage of that. I don't know if America doesn't. I think that the American elites don't really. I mean, they have, they're very ambivalent. I mean, they do in the face of Russia. There was this sort of idea that we come together, we're the West, we're something. At the same time, there is sort of this idea that, we're colonizers and we're racists and this and that. But I think that America still has a lot to offer compared to what the alternatives that people see around the world. And even if you look at like opinion polling of like, do people like the United States? In most of the world, people do like the United States. They don't like the alternatives.
Yeah, but that's exactly the problem, that the choice now is between the bad and the worse, and not, between the shining city on the hill and, the gulag. And this choice tends to be much less obvious, especially if you're partisan, especially if you're tired of the status quo, which a lot of people are. And even the example of Hong Kong, yes, the US inspired the protests, but it's also the story of betrayal, because once the crackdown happened, the US and the international community didn't do anything. And now the Hong Kong is firmly within the Chinese political system, and it's never going to change because, again, what is there to do?
Yeah, well, there's nothing to do. I mean, you're right. I mean, I don't know what we could have done about Hong Kong. See, that's the issue. So yeah, it is.
Well,
it is the sort of. I mean, China and Russia and some of these other places. I mean, the public opinion. They do seem to have, whether it's genuine or it's because they control. I mean, like within China and within Russia, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people aspired for the American ideal, and those are powers with with military capability. So it has to sort of be respected. It's just part of the global system.
No, it is. And there's nothing you can do on the military level with China or Putin's Russia today. But there's a lot of what you can do on the cultural level, which U.S. today is lacking, because there's no more this, Hollywood, the dream-making machine that, again, was, I think, big part of why the Cold War was won by the U.S. is because you kept producing those dreams and ideals, which apparently U.S. is failing to produce nowadays.
Communism, because the alternative communism was just so bad. I mean, I think that's the reason it made people so poor that the American alternative was just so obviously better. Now, China has had, it's slowed down recently, but it's had remarkable economic growth for 20, 30 years. Russia has had some periods of growth, some periods not so much growth. But, it's not the sense that like you're going to be poor forever if you're in the communist system, which I think people understood in the 80s, which made America more appealing. We're just unlucky that we don't have sort of that alternative to point to.
Yeah, but there's also the fact that because of the mass migration, now there's an easy way out available to the local population. Basically, where you had to fight for your own freedom 40, 50 years ago, today it's much easier to cross border from Mexico to the US, and sort of avoid the whole conundrum altogether. And that's basically what the Democratic Party in the US was promoting for the past couple of decades. And I think that actually undermined a lot of liberation movement across the world, because if people can just run away, they will, because what's the point of fighting?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, because people wanted to run away from this from the Eastern Bloc, and they did, and the wall came down, and these societies, as people were leaving, reformed themselves, right? So, like the Eastern former Soviet satellites, they emptied out, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland. A lot of them went west, and at the same time, those countries adopted, a democratic capitalist model, and they had strong economic growth at the same time. So I don't know. It's not always obvious how to fix these countries. I think a lot of these countries are in the third world. It's not clear. We might have ideas about how to fix them, but it's not simple. Like Mexico just has a dictator it has to fight against, right? Mexico has all kinds of problems. It has problems with state capacity. So it's not like people know the exact way to fix things. I have some ideas about that. I think Bukele, what he's doing in El Salvador is very admirable. I've written some articles about this. We need more of that. That's sort of, it's the opposite. It's like it's like you need the strong man to order, because countries have forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, but it's not just about being a strong man. It's also, again, about the inspiration. And the funny thing about Bukele and Javier Milei, who was just elected in Argentina, is that both of them are inspired by the American experience, but American experience of 200 years ago, and not whatever you have today.
Well, it's also the American sort of libertarian right. I'm sure that they read, I'm sure that Milei has read a lot of American libertarians in the last 50 years. Now, they're not the dominant faction in American society today, but they're inspired, right? So America is not, one thing. America is the campus left radicals that inspire people. America is also sometimes the libertarians and the right wingers. It's funny, you see Bolsonaro and Brazil, and they're running, they're yelling about stolen election, this and that, even before the election's happening. And Malaya did this too. And why are they doing this? Just because American right wingers started saying stolen election, so they all started believing the same thing. So American sort of cultural imperialism, America's divided and it's fragmented, but it's still very, very strong.
Yeah, but if we talk about American foreign policy, and I think the example of Bolsonaro is actually very interesting, is because it feels like American diplomacy and the American political class ended up supporting Lula, who is quite strongly anti-American, just because they despised Bolsonaro and whatever he found attractive in the American society. And I think the same thing happened with Milei. If you read articles in New York Times and Washington Post about Milei, they portray him as this right-wing extremist, dictator.
But the IMF is pro Milei, though. That's an interesting thing. I mean, it's not all completely, in one direction or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, but Bolsonaro, I think, is a much more obvious example. And with Lula, you have president who's very friendly with Putin and friendly with Iran, and he invited Iranian fleet to the port of Rio de Janeiro, things like that. Something unthinkable. Seemed by the American establishment as a dictator, and at the same time, the communist comes to power, and all of a sudden, Biden is happy, and the White House regards him as the victory of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is sort of. It does depend on the presidency. So yeah, that goes back to there not being one America, right? I think Trump was friendly to Bolsonaro. I think that somebody like Viktor Orban is going to be, welcome in Trump's sort of Washington. I think, 20 years ago, Orban would have been shunned by both sides of the foreign policy establishment. Now, I think when Republicans are in power, it's something different. So, yeah, I mean, you do have sort of these America, Latin America is an interesting thing because it's the categories do line up. It's not like Afghanistan or Iraq, or like there's an identifiable right wing and an identifiable left wing, right? There's Islamists and there's Sunni and there's Shia and all this other stuff. In Latin America, you have these parties and these politicians that are sort of, you can see heavily the influence, and Americans can look at, conservatives can look at Milei and say, that's our guy. Well, it's funny how silly Americans are, because the MAGA, I mean, like people point out on Twitter, like his economic policy is actually anti-nationalist and anti-pro-ness. It's pro-free market. They don't realize that. It's just sort of a cultural, he's anti-left. But yeah, the left can look at that and see somebody who's sort of more redistribution, who's socially liberal. You have something like Venezuela, right, where it's like so far left that it's considered it's hostile. It gets hostility for both sides, right? So the left wing establishment is not as left wing as the most left wing people in Latin America, as you can see. In fact, like Biden is not like friends with Maduro or anything.
Well, there has been some reconciliation
right.
in the past years. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But they're not friends. They're not big fans of him or something. And so yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, Latin America doesn't factor heavily in my book, but it is sort of a it's funny, the immigration thing. It is sort of, it's just the whole Western Hemisphere is just one big battle. It's like Bukele does something, Milei does something, and we're all like, yes, and then the leftists win something, and then the leftists can say something else. I think it's more of the energy on the right. I don't think the left in America I don't think they're inspired by Lula or anything like that, or definitely not Chavez. I think maybe the right is getting a little bit more energy by seeing some of their ideas in practice. But yeah, it is just all one big sort of political system here in the Western Hemisphere.
But I think mainly there's a lack of inspiration on the left, because they were winning for so long that it's hard to present these ideas as revolutionary anymore, because they've won like on the half of hemisphere, at least in the half of Western world, definitely. So whenever Lula comes to power, just another communist, the head of the Latin American country. What's new? And with libertarianism, there's this sense of something happening that hasn't happened before.
Yeah. I mean, the left, when you say, the left is always winning, I think it depends, the cultural left. Yeah. I mean, I think economic leftists aren't necessarily, and then there's a lot less sort of government direct control of the economy in the world than there was 30, 40 years ago. So I don't know if they feel like they're always winning. They always complain about neoliberalism and capitalism, sort of just destroying the earth. So yeah, it's a mix. I just think the leftist ideas are just wrong. I mean, that's why they're, it's not like winning or losing. It's like, they don't work. I mean, the European welfare state, Europe has, weak growth. They're going to be, the pension thing, the pension issue is coming. If you're going to be soft on crime, you're going to get a lot of crime. Migration, even though, I've been more friendly to it than a lot of people, it does cause a lot of problems, and some of this sort of blindness to the cultural issues from people coming in, just withdrawing from the world and not, and thinking that like, you're just not firing back at the Houthis when they're obstructing international shipping. It just doesn't work. Markets work, sort of deterrence and violence against bad actors at home and abroad, that works too. And when you get away from that, you just get problems.
Yeah, but if you focus on when you focus on rational behavior, I think it's important to have your premises, straight. And I think that's the problem that the right had in general, because there's a reason why left ideas are so persistent. There's a reason why people keep, falling for the same thing, because there's something there that attracts them on a persistent level. And just saying that, communism doesn't work and socialism doesn't work doesn't deal with the problem on the intellectual level, because maybe it doesn't work, but it constantly wins on the political battleground, and you have to respect that.
Yeah, I mean, it's psychologically appealing, but wokeness, I mean, it shifts, because when one thing is proven, like, so the economic stuff doesn't work, you go to the cultural stuff and you say, we're gonna be woke. And so, but like, you don't solve racism or racial tensions, and you don't close racial gaps. And like, people become mentally ill, this getting rid of gender and all this stuff doesn't lead to happier people. It seems to lead to people, all kinds of mental problems. And so maybe now you go back to the economic stuff because you forgot the communism was bad, right? So it does seem like it is a psychological psychological urge, but it does respond to sort of what's happening in the real world and things failing.
Don't you think it's not just like the psychology and people fall for just forgetting what communism is all about, but it's also like this rationality on the individual level, where like in the game theory, behaving in manner that destroys the society can be beneficial to the individual on the certain time frame, and that's why they behave that way. So basically, you can destroy, a country, you can destroy a value of a million people, but as long as you're better off than you were a day ago, it may be a worthy deal to you.
That makes sense for the left-wing leaders like Maduro or something like that, where
Yeah,
they
yeah.
destroy the country but they stay in power, right? For the masses, it's more psychological because they're not necessarily getting the benefit. It's a collective action problem where one person is not going to bring down society or anything. They're making their often they're making their mental health worse, and they're screwing up their lives and just being worse off. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of a rational choice aspect of sort of leaders and how politicians behave, and that's sort of a mass psychology element of this.
Yeah, but it's also a rational choice on an individual level as well. And just looking at what happens in Russia right now, I think there's a great example of that. That basically everyone knows that country is heading in the wrong direction, but every step of the way, you hope that you're not going to be the next to be repressed. You're not going to be the next one to lose everything. You're not going to be the next one to be thrown in jail. Yeah. And maybe there's a leeway for you to profit from the situation. And I see a lot of people doing that and sort of adopting this worldview that you're going to try and maneuver around the history, and maybe you'll succeed.
Yeah, I mean, people do commonly seek out their interest in whatever system they have, right? And the question is why people resist in some circumstances and not others. Like why is an interesting one, right? Like why did the Iranians in 2022, they had those huge protests against their government, and why is Russia, I mean, relatively passive? Maybe it's just public opinion. Maybe the Iranian people hate their government and the Russian people are maybe not so hostile. But yeah, it's an interesting question, sort of why people are more passive at sometimes and more sort of active at others.
Yeah, but I'd say there is an answer, and it's half learned helplessness and half economic incentives, which actually pretty much the same thing. Because in Russia, people have a history of oppression, and they basically know what can happen if you go against the government. And I think the same thing kind of happens in Iran as well, because whatever protests you have there, they fizzle out and stop because people realize that individual risk overwhelm the possibility of a regime change. And the same thing goes to American foreign policy, and I'll try to link the two together. Is because you had so many failures in the past 2 decades, there is actually this kind of a learned behavior that Americans promise a lot and they don't deliver, and whoever tries to rely on American support will end up worse off than they were. And I think the example of Venezuela is actually a great one, where what was the Juan Guaido, the president of the opposition president of Venezuela, was actually supported by the American diplomats, supported by the Western world. But in the end of the day, he didn't receive enough help to overpower Maduro. And now basically the opposition is gone and Maduro is stronger than he ever was. The same kind of thing is happening in Ukraine right now, where there was a lot of promises, and Ukraine sacrificed a lot and took upon itself a war with Russia. But now it turns out, that nobody is interested in seeing the war to the end, and everyone just wants Ukraine to be out of their picture.
Yeah, and what the strange thing about the Ukraine case is we could have said beforehand that it wasn't worth it to us. We could have tried to guarantee.
Yeah, and Ukraine would have been better off.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we could have said no NATO expansion, and we didn't do that. And why we didn't do that, it's hard to get like a good answer for it. I think my book helps with puzzles like this, is because it was always sort of short-term political interest thinking. It was a grand strategy. There was a grand strategy. You would have come to a negotiation, or you would have gone all in and defended Ukraine completely. We didn't do either one of those things. We provoked Russia, to invade. I mean, provoke, I'm not saying like morally, I'm just saying like by not taking NATO off the table, we, made it more likely they would invade. And then when they invaded, we put forth a lot of help, but sort of not, as much like not it wasn't a complete total commitment, right? And some people will say, oh, they just want the war and they want to bleed Russia. And I don't believe that. I think that's too rational. I think it just sort of ended up that way where it's like if you can't make a decision, this is the result you end up with.
So, what is the solution to this problem? I mean, without having a grand strategy, without being able to actually do foreign politics in any consistent manner, the perspective is that the U.S. is going to slowly, gradually lose its power just simply because China and Russia can do that, and that's actually has been Putin's strategy for the longest time. He just hopes to, sit out American presidents, and hope that opinions within the U.S. are going to change, and he's going to get what he always wanted.
Yeah, I mean, we might be lucky they might shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, China with the zero COVID, with a lot of their stupid economic policies. I mean, they're not necessarily. I don't know if they're necessarily smarter than us. I think Xi Jinping is, to a great extent, seems to be about maximum power, not necessarily maximizing the power of China, which are different things. He wants to Q-proof his regime. He doesn't want open markets because open markets will make people wealthier, potentially have more freedom, more contact with the outside world, potentially more opposition. Better to keep them relatively poor and to stay in control of society, right? And so, like American foreign policy, I mean, there's still a lot that could be done. I think you could do fait accomplis, like whatever people think about it, like the Trump policy towards Israel, for example. They moved the embassy to Jerusalem. That's never going to change. I mean, they recognize the Golan Heights. That's never going to change. And so there are the like if some policy issue gets solved under your regime, or there's some regime change or something, that's going to stick. So you can still do things in foreign policy. You just have to be aware you can't rely on somebody to have a strategy to see it through with the next administration.
Yeah, it's funny that you're saying that the American policy toward Israel is never going to change because, well, from looking outside into what's going on.
The move to Jerusalem will never. They're never. I don't think they're going to move it back from Jerusalem. The recognition. I don't think.
No. I don't think it's going to happen like in that manner. But what I think is that Israel is on the brink of losing American support. At least that's how it looks from the outside. And personally, the way I explain the military operation in Gaza is that basically Netanyahu realized that the window of opportunity was closing, and that in 20 years' time, you will have those woke diplomats who graduated Harvard, Stanford, Penn University, and they'll hold completely different opinions towards Israel than the old guard does.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think the Biden administration is more doing PR to try to be pressuring Israel rather than actually pressuring Israel. I think they've done a sort of a very skillful job of always saying Israel's got to do more to take into account, civilian casualties, while not actually doing anything, while not actually, cutting off aid or anything like that. So I think the Biden administration is actually having a sort of pro-Israel policy, but trying to make it look like that they're doing something else. In 20 years, who knows? I think the Republicans are going to be more rabidly pro-Israel than they have been in the past. So half the time, I've read about this that they're going to have more ability to do whatever they want. I think Trump was the most tilted towards Israel that we've had since Israel's founded. I think it's going to be like that for every Republican administration going forward. And the Democrats are going to have internal battles over this because they have a lot of rich elite, a lot of Jewish members who are in positions of power, although they're not numerically huge within the Democratic coalition. But then a lot of leftists who see Israel as this, colonizer and oppressor, and are going to hate Israel, and that's going to be a mess for the left from now on.
And you don't think that these sort of common anti-Semitism on the left is going to embolden right anti-Semitism as well? And you kind of see it in people like Nick Fuentes, for example, who's been vehemently anti-Israel and anti-Jew and been saying a lot of anti-Semitic things. And it feels like with consensus changing and with Israel stepping into a much more precautious position, these things will be generally more accepted. And
Yeah, I mean, a lot of young people listen to Nick Fuentes, but if you look at polling of Republicans and they support Israel, if you look at the politicians, the members of Congress, and whether they support Israel, I think it's the online right wing the right wing anti-Semitism is a very online phenomenon. I think it's yet to be seen if it can have an influence in the real world.
Yeah, but you're talking at the same time. You're talking about the old guard. You're talking about the people who are at the end of their political careers, and the young
I mean,
people.
look at young congressmen too. Look at young congressmen. I don't think there are many that are anti-Israel.
Ocasio-Cortez and the
Oh,
other one.
I thought we were talking about the Republican side.
Okay, Republican side. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wonder what's going to happen. I just don't feel that. I think Republicans tap into different kind of energy than the Democrats do, and they are less reliant on being part of the Ivy school elite than Democrats are. That's why the influence hasn't been as pronounced. And of course, you have this religious phenomenon as well, with evangelicals being pro-Israel, strongly pro-Israel. But the question is, with the decline in God worship and the church attendance, how long it's going to last. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I share your optimism on that question, but it's not really. It's not the question that I wanted to ask, because to me, what is, I think, the reason why I invited you on my show is that I feel like because America and the United States lost its vision, it's not just not able to have a coherent foreign policy. It's also has been sending the wrong kinds of incentives, because basically again, I've already mentioned that in the last 2 decades, American foreign policy was a mess. You failed in Iraq, you failed in Afghanistan, you failed in Hong Kong, you're about to fail in Ukraine if things going to go the same way.
I wouldn't claim Hong Kong. I don't know what we could Hong Kong.
No. Yeah, so maybe I have to explain my own background as well. So I'm part of the Russian opposition. I've been trying to fight Putin for basically my whole life, and there has been a lot of involvement, not in my political activities, but in the activity of Russian opposition from American funds and from American politicians and from NGOs and things like that. And they influence opposition movements in other countries immensely with money and with connections and with influence and things like that. I'm pretty sure, I'm positive that the same kind of thing happened in Hong Kong. And these kind of NGOs and these kind of politicians, they inspire people to do stupid things that actually leave them worse off than they were before, taking drastic actions in their own hands. So yes, and obviously America was not involved in Hong Kong military or on any other level, but with American funds, the American money were there.
But it's a high standard to expect that America can overthrow the government of China and Hong Kong. I mean, it wasn't realistic. Maybe they just, they failed, but the mission was impossible. It wasn't realistic.
Again, I'm not a Chinese or Hong Kong activist, so I don't know what exactly was going through their heads. But I can easily imagine that they were convinced that they can claw away from China, some more independence to Hong Kong, and clutch to Hong Kong independence for a little bit longer, something like that. The same things that were promised to Ukraine, for example. Ukraine was convinced that they can fight off Putin, that the West will support it till the end, and see that Crimea is going to be returned to Ukraine, and that wasn't true. And anyone who has any expertise in foreign politics or in has any interest in how Russia operates would realize that unless you're ready to commit till the end, you're not gonna see Ukraine victorious.
Yeah. I mean, the Ukrainian. I mean, it is interesting because the sort of the right wing sort of opposition to Ukraine. This is something I didn't. I mean, see, I thought it was sort of like I said about online and sort of anti-Semitism. This was started out as an online thing. The sort of Russophilia, sort of anti-Ukraine thing, but it became sort of mainstreamed on the right. I think probably because of Trump. I mean, it's hard to explain to people how much of a sort of cult of personality. So Trump is pro-Israel, but he's he's anti-Ukraine. So conservatives remain, they remain pro-Israel and anti-Ukraine. I mean, it is just a very sort of cultish movement, because Trump, the masses, the right wing voting masses, really like Trump. They don't care about other politicians, and then politicians have to stay on Trump's good side. And this is just sort of, and the media figures all have to be anti-Zelensky, and then pro-Israel generally. There's no market for the anti-Israel message, and the really big people like Ben Shapiro or Tucker Carlson, they're not doing anti-Israel stuff. Maybe Tucker will do some little bit Israel skeptical stuff, but not anti-Israel. So yeah, I think a lot of this is just sort of Trump, and maybe this is something I might write about soon. I think that people don't understand how much our politics is just Trump, and then when Trump goes away, it'll just be Nikki Haley. I mean, I think people think it's going to always be radical and always be crazy. I just see sort of just Trump as this one singular figure that is sort of warping everything.
No, Trump is a zeitgeist of American politics, definitely. And but at the same time, he taps into some real energy that is there, regardless of Trump.
Unquestionably, I mean, it's unquestionably, but it doesn't consolidate. It's very disorganized. It's like all these people who are just sort of angry about things or have these sort of attitudes, and they never have one candidate or one guy. And a lot of it is just the personality of Trump. A lot of just regular people. They knew him from before he was a celebrity, and they're just following him, and they'll do whatever he says. Those people go out of the Republican Party. I mean, the traditional conservatives, all of a sudden are sort of, they're the ones in the driver's seat, because a lot of these people are sort of non-Republicans, or they wouldn't be involved in politics in the first place if it wasn't for Trump.
So you see Trump as a singular kind of character and not part of this wave of populism that involves most of the Western world, to be honest.
I mean, it's both, but the Europeans have had populism. They have the populism because they have a fragmented electoral system, right? We have a two-party system, and so we haven't necessarily had populist figures, right? Because in the Netherlands and France, you have 3-4 parties at the time or something like that. So the U.S. system really isn't according with that, unless you have someone who's so big, who's so famous, he could take over the Republican Party, right? And so if Trump is not there, it's not like that's going to be Ted Cruz or J.D. Vance or something. It's just going to be the Republican Party is going to be, once again, the interest groups. The pro-life people here, the free market anti-tax people here. And that's why the politicians who are not Trump, who are successful and Republican, it's like DeSantis, it's like Nikki Haley. These are conventional sort of politicians. They're not like a mini Trump who's just his own kind of thing. So this is why I think, Trump is going to be for a while. He's going to be the nominee. He might win. But once Trump is not there, I think there's a chance that Republican politics, who knows, AI and all this stuff in 10 years, what's going to happen. But, just on the current trajectory, I think it's a good chance that, Trump goes away. Things become a lot more normal.
I give you that. Trump is unique, but at the same time, you always had Sarah Palin's, you have Vivek Ramaswamy's, who's parroting Trump at the moment, and again, the energy is still there. And if
a couple percent, Palin, was quit her job and didn't run for president because she had no chance. A lot of these people, they can't. They're there, but they never go anywhere. It's just Trump has been unique.
So you don't think that because I see you making the same kind of mistake that Democrats did in 2020, where they basically saw Trump as this fluke, of history, that that now that Biden is president, things are going to get back to normal, and of course they never did. Not just because Trump is unique and drastic, but also because the problems and the energy that actually brought Trump to power was never dealt with and is still being ignored.
Well, a lot of things did go back to normal. We didn't have the riots of 2020. We didn't have the COVID disturbance. Things did get normal to a certain extent. And, I don't know, are we, American society, our politics are angry, and they've been getting angry since, really since the 80s and 90s. But, I think we're more normal relative to the Trump era. People remember how sort of insane, the media was every single day, the sort of all the sports media. I was talking to Ethan Strauss, who's a sports writer. He wrote a piece about how it used to be, 3 years ago, you go to sports media, it's not about sports. It's all about gay marriage, and it's all about, trans, and it's all about, racism. And now you go to the sports page, sports websites, and they're just talking about sports again, right? So America, I think, did did go back to a normal to a large extent after Trump left. And yeah, I don't see where this like permanent trajectory towards sort of crazy land.
Well, yeah, again, looking from the outside, I'd say it's more of a wishful thinking at the moment, because the way America identifies itself outside of the U.S. has been very like liberal in the American kind of sense, and the only reason why you see these kind of changes in the like sports programs and things like that is precisely because the right started to pulling in the opposite direction, and you actually need to have these kind of radicals and both sides to cancel each other out, because and it's just one side pulling, then you have constantly shifting middle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the sort of development. Yeah, Chris Rufo and Rufoism. I think this stuff with DeSantis did in Florida, that's great stuff. You got to push back against the wokeness. That's what I encourage people to do in my book, my second book, Origins of Woke. So yeah, I'm with you there. But it is kind of normal. I mean, it is kind of like DeSantis is a sort of normal politician. Okay, he'll get rid of DEI and all this other stuff. He's not like a cultural phenomenon like Trump is, right? If DeSantis became the nominee or Nikki Haley became the nominee, it's gonna be Trump. But if it was DeSantis or Nikki Haley, I mean, people wouldn't be that interested in our politics. I mean, it would be a sort of a boring election. It wouldn't be boring for me because I like politics, very interested in politics and interested ideas will be very interested in it, but it wouldn't dominate the culture in the way that a Trump Biden rematch is. It's just this man is just such an amazing, amazing force of our politics that he just sort of distorts everything.
Wouldn't you compare him to like Obama administration? Because Obama is also like, unlike Trump, Obama came out of nowhere, but he also was this kind of force that reshaped American politics, and actually a lot of woke politics, the things you write about, that stems from his administration and things that he did. Obviously, it goes much further back in time to the Civil Rights Acts, which I think you're absolutely right about. But in the modern politics, that's where the ground zero of the change.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing about Obama is he didn't govern. He wasn't exciting in the way Trump was exciting. I mean, Trump, when he was like, Obama got people
for the are you sure? Again, I'm not sure because I'm looking from the outside, but just looking at the news, it felt like Obama was very exciting to the left side of the political spectrum.
He was when he first came on the scene. They thought, oh, this is this young, idealistic, black guy who's going to come. He's going to solve racism. He's going to lead us into a new generation, new future. And so, yeah, 2008, there was so much energy. Obama won, the Great Recession, all that. Obama won. But then, the public sort of turned on him. He did poorly in the 2010 midterms of the Tea Party and all that. 2012, he won against Romney, but it was sort of it wasn't seen as this great triumph. It was just he won re-election, and that it wasn't like the politics was not as constantly. Trump always gave you something exciting. That was the think about it. It's like always a new show, always a new sort of angle, new characters coming in, new things happening. And so, yeah, you're right. Obama as a cultural phenomenon, he was important, but not as much as Trump. And under Obama, everything didn't become about politics. It wasn't like every late night show, all the talk shows, all the sports, all the music, all the. I mean, under Trump, 2017 to 2020, I lived in America, my whole life, just a crazy time. It was like nothing else. And it wasn't like before, and like since the last 2 years, it's getting a little bit. It's moved away from it, and yeah.
No, it's actually. I personally, I think I understand it really well because Trump inspired not just the American public but the world as well. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but Russia Today, right? So the head of the Russia Today, Margarita Simonyan, she was actually driving a car on the night of election with American flag, celebrating the election of Trump, which is and again, it was not like isolated phenomenon. It happened in Brazil, it happened in Argentina, it happened all over the world because
and we have the BLM protests, New Zealand and all this other stuff. Exactly. It really is a global culture, right?
It is a global culture, and which kind of brings me back to the point that America is not a typical empire, and I would argue that it's almost irresponsible to get yourself involved in the other country's domestic affairs without offering, becoming part of the empire. And I think that's what makes the U.S. very special and makes your foreign policy very flawed. because in the past, when an empire conquered a country, it offered, it offered conquered people, to become part of the Pax Romana, or
We don't have, we can't even, I mean, we can't even, maintain order in our cities. I mean, we're not gonna, Washington D.C. right outside, you go right outside the White House, right outside Congress, you get shot.
Yeah, but
We can't do any of that. You're right.
That's kind of the point, because I feel like American foreign policy brings to countries not the kind of politics that makes American system attractive, because basically, this strong constitutional rights, the First and Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights. But whenever America gets involved, in Iraq or Afghanistan or any like Latin America country, or Ukraine for that matters, you offer money, you offer support, but in the end of the day, the only thing standing on the land will be democracy, and which is hopefully slightly better than the one before, but it's not even that is often the case.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. Yeah. I mean, you look at it's just the third world is just very, it's just pessimistic because it didn't work out. I mean, the East Asia and Europe really developed. They've been able to develop since the end of World War II, and the third world, really hasn't. Now there are some situations. I mean, there are some successes of American farmers. I mean, I think the Gulf Arab states. I mean, I think they're a net positive for humanity compared to what the alternative would be. I think something like the UAE is very good. I mean, they exist because of American power, because it's there to defend it. The U.S. defended Kuwait. It defends these places from Iran.
Yeah, but it didn't help these places come to be. It just support.
It can sit there. Yeah, it can't lead. It can provide a military strength. Even like South Korea, it didn't build South Korea. I mean, South Korea built itself, but the U.S. defended it and allowed it to become something. Same thing with something like Taiwan, and defended it. Sort of defended, not as clearly as South Korea. And so, I mean, the U.S. can't. Yeah, the U.S. I mean, I think that its role in the world is mixed. I've written a lot about this. I think it's good. It does defend South Korea. I mean, it does sort of make China at least think twice about invading Taiwan. At the same time, in Latin America, drug war, a lot of our sort of foreign policy has been destructive. And so it's a mixed bag. I think people need to sort of take it as it is and try to make it better where they can.
And is it possible for the U.S. to sort of maintain this foreign policy if it's not capable of producing a grand strategy? Because basically that's why Putin called the American bluff. He said that you can't pull off what you're threatening. I'm going to invade Ukraine, and let's see what you're going to do. And 2 years into the war, the answer is yes. The U.S. is not ready to follow its word and to support Ukraine to the end. And China is looking at it and realizing, hey, the same is going to happen in Taiwan, and it's probably going to happen because that's why the U.S. is relocating the production of processors from Taiwan to other countries, because there is this tacit understanding that America is there, but not for long.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's not exactly the Russia thing. I mean, the Ukraine. I mean, they did provide some weapons to Ukraine. I think Ukraine, did better than they would have done better. They would have
absolutely, sure.
The US, hadn't supported them, right? So it's mixed like everything. And you're right. The long term, I think we've realized that sort of the US is not as, powerful as it wishes, in the sense that Russia is going to basically be able to at least control or threaten eastern Ukraine, parts of eastern Ukraine, indefinitely into the future. And I mean, I think that's just all. I mean, that's always been sort of understood as a limit of American power. We should have probably been a little, maybe been a little less ambitious. I don't know if we stood with Ukraine 100%. I don't know if it would have, short of sending troops, I don't know if we could have done it, because it's just Ukraine is in a bad shape. Ukraine is bad shape, right? Maybe it's just a miracle Ukraine, fought as well as it has.
Yeah, it is a miracle, and I think the first months of war were understood as something unexpected by the rest of the world as well. But at the same time, the price of containing Russia was literal depopulation of Ukraine, and it's just not obvious that it can survive. Once the war is over, it's not obvious it can reform itself with the kind of resources that it has, and first of all, human resources.
Yeah, no, Ukraine is in bad shape demographically. I mean, a lot of those people left. A lot of them are not coming back. A lot of people have died. It's a very sad situation.
Yeah, but these kind of situations sort of fuel resentment, and they fuel resentment, and again create the kind of incentives that you mentioned in your book about public choice theory. Is that if you constantly send the kind of signal that if you're going to trust us, and if you're going to trust us, you're going to lose everything and not gain much, people will stop looking at the US for protection, and they will stop looking for the American help for any kind of long-term meaningful negotiation, because the track record is so poor.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, I mean, I don't want to be too overly, pessimistic in the sense that a lot of these countries do rely on the U.S. for weapons. They're able to defend themselves, and the U.S. deterrence has been working, right? We're deterring, North Korea from invading South Korea. I don't know if North Korea would invade South Korea anyway, but you could look at this stuff.
You keep going back to these Cold War examples, in South Korea and North Korea. Yeah, it's obviously a success, but it's a success that is 70 years old, which.
I mean, but it's every day is potential. Something could change, right? It is the system is maintaining, right? The NATO alliance, the countries that have been led into NATO, they haven't been fighting wars against Russia, and so I mean, it does count. I mean, as long as the system is still working.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like the Putin gave NATO a kind of a chance, because there was a lot of disillusionment with NATO, especially after the Afghanistan and Iraq war. And I think Emmanuel Macron actually said that NATO lost its mind. But now that Putin lost his mind, suddenly, there's a new reason why NATO exists. And Finland and Sweden, obviously, are joining right now the alliance. But at the same time, it feels like it's an alliance of necessity and not of vision. Because what NATO stands for is increasingly not clear, except sort of containing Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of an alliance of inertia. I mean, I think that's what a lot of foreign policy is. It's just inertia. Nobody's leaving NATO, even though Turkey and Hungary, the U.S. might have disagreements with. They're still there. This might I say this like a bad thing, but just inertia, sort of unthinking sort of processes. They can be beneficial. It's probably good that we're not renegotiating alliances and borders all the time. It's America is I mean, I think if people who want to change American foreign policy, they have to sort of take the system as it is. They have to sort of I try to do something things very strict in my writing, right? So in the civil rights book, I say these are the exact laws that you have to change. By writing on foreign policy, in my first foreign policy, the first book, the foreign policy one, I talk about what kind of laws you could pass or what kind of regulations potentially you could do. I don't know if I really buy all that stuff, but more recent writing on sort of Israel, I give sort of specifics of American foreign policy and what they should be doing. And so I think that's all we can do is sort of understand the political dynamics and try to shift policy in a good direction on the margin. No one's coming along and saying, I'm going to provide America a great vision. I mean, it's just nobody's there on the horizon. There's no, you could imagine somebody like,
well, make America great again was this and America first.
The vision, but Trump is not gonna. I mean, he's gonna be hated by more than half the country, so it's not gonna work. I mean, it's not gonna be the foreign policy establishment's gonna hate him. It's not gonna unify the country. He can do some stuff. He can do stuff while he's in office, but it's not gonna be like it's gonna change the sort of fragmented nature of all this.
Yeah, but it's not. It doesn't matter if he's hated by half the country. It's the question if he can inspire not just the U.S. but the rest of the world as well. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were divisive figures as well, but because they came up with the coherent vision of the future for their own countries, they became these icons of politics.
Yeah, but part of it is, I mean, they were internationalists who said, we're all going to trade, we're all going to, work together. And Trump is more like, America first. We're all, the trade is, is something that's, it's about other countries screwing us over, and we got to screw them over, and they got to pay their fair share, and we got to pay. So it's a very sort of transactional and sort of nationalistic. So I don't know if it really works in the way that Reaganism and Thatcherism worked.
Well, I mean, nationalist ideas had its track records of success, especially inspiring people, not always for good, but inspiring
Well, I mean, there's a
nevertheless.
small-minded nationalism and there's a sort of broad-minded nationalism, right? I think the Trump's nationalism, the kind of thing that people talk about, is very, very small-minded. We have to get every cent we can, out of the other country. We're going to have a deal. We can't, we can't get screwed over. It's like that. It's not like America is this.
I think, don't you think it's Trump who's being small-minded, but the movement is actually not? Because the movement is more or less about, attempt to return country to its origins, to being great. It doesn't matter who Trump is; he's just, the face of the movement.
I mean, it depends on what you think the movement is. I think that the Trump movement is a cult of personality. So I think what Trump is basically the movement. Now, like, I think that the people who are, there is like sort of this residual Reaganism, which does want to sort of, have the country, smaller government and be international leadership. But that's not like inspiring. That's not the Trump movement. That's sort of in opposition to the Trump movement. I don't see really the broad sort of, it's also, even sometimes it's broad in the sense that it's international. Like, oh, Europe has to close its borders because it's because the Muslims are going to come and they're going to change Europe. So it's sort of like that. But even that is like, it's internationalist, but it's also just very sort of a fearful vision. Okay, we're whites or we're Westerners, and we're worried about what's going to happen in the world. So as far as Trump goes, I think it's hard to see the broad mindedness of it. I think it's very sort of parochial, even when it's supposedly internationalist.
Oh yeah, but it's a rebellion against the system. So it's like the punk. Donald Trump is is doing a political. He's a political punk figure. So he's just bringing sledgehammer to the system, and that's why people support him, because they are tired of the system. And that's why, in my opinion, Trump has become surprisingly became an international phenomenon, because people in general are upset and tired of the status quo.
But is Trump? I mean, is Trump inspired? Because I look at Trump's polling in other countries, even like something like Hungary, I see very small approval rating for Trump. So I mean, do people like Trump anywhere in the world? Is there a lot of people being inspired by Trump? And it wasn't.
Yeah, but it's very rare that the other nations, start to like a nationalist of a different country.
But they do.
They use him for the inspiration, but they're not going to love him because he's American and they are Hungarians.
No, but Hungarians like Obama. If you look at Obama's sort of approval rating, right? Like the Democratic presidents tend to be more popular in these European countries. So I don't know. I mean, Obama can inspire. You can. American leader JFK, I think.
Yeah, but Obama taps into a different kind of energy. He's taps into this internationalist, liberal kind of energy that goes back, even to Marxist roots, and where Trump taps into nationalist energy, which is much harder to internationalize. And if you look at the right-wing thinkers and politicians in different countries, they talk to each other much less than the left-wing politicians do. So it's normal, for Lula to talk to Bernie Sanders, but it's unthinkable for, let's say, Ted Cruz to talk to Bolsonaro, for example. Yeah, Trump talked to Bolsonaro.
Oh no, I don't think that's right. I think Bolsonaro. I think probably if you Google it, like I know Orban has become very mainstreamed within the Republican right. Like people like the Heritage Foundation. He's going to like turning CPAC. He's they went to Hungary. It's very and Bolsonaro. I don't think it's that different. I'm pretty sure Bolsonaro probably has a lot of contacts with the American right too. Besides,
no, there has been some contacts, but again, you have to agree that it's more of an exception, because for the left, it's been normal since the early 20th century, since the International, since once there is one communist revolution, the entire world becomes your political playground, so to speak. The right never thought in this kind of kind of terms.
Yeah, they're less internationalist sort of baseline. You're right.
Yeah, and the final question and final topic that I'd like to discuss: do you think is there a solution to that, or do you think that it's inherently built into the kind of right worldview, nationalist worldview.
Yeah, is it can the right be more sort of internationalist in its outlook? No, I think the Republican base, I mean, is people who want to generally be left alone. Um, they're not going to have as many sort of busybodies and sort of broad thinkers and idealists as the left. Now, at the same time, even though that's sort of the Republican sort of broad base, at the elite level, you can have difference. I've watched the Republican Party over my not that very long life, as long as I've been paying attention to politics, shift radically based on what their leaders say. So, Bush, told them you go fight in Iraq. You have, that sort of lost its popularity at the end. And then you see Trump, and you see just like one issue after the other, they just sort of follow Trump, and it's about who Trump mobilizes, right? So the American right is sort of doesn't have gatekeepers. It's not as institutionalized as the left, so sort of up for grabs. So this is why participating in the marketplace of ideas on the American right is pretty fruitful, because the American right is very influential, and it's always it's sort of always open to people to come in and try to push it in a different direction. And yeah, I think that the American right, the future of the American right is pretty wide open.
And talking about the American right and the Elon Musk phenomenon, and I think this can be the route for the conservative movement, the direction for the conservative movement is that to become more open to the West, while at the same time guarding your own interests and preserving some of the values that great. And I think Elon Musk phenomenon is fascinating to me, and I just wish that it's not going to fizzle out and die.
Well, the Elon Musk phenomenon, Elon Musk is not going to run for office, but I think him buying Twitter is going to be the legacy that's going to potentially change our politics. It's interesting. It's going to be I don't know if it helps Republicans in elections, because it's like more crazy people on the right are having more influence. And so it's sort of like the left when it dominated social media. The crazy people had more influence and hurt the Democrats electorally. We might be seeing that, but it might be it might be bad for sort of conservative politics in the short run, but maybe good for sort of conservative ideas in the long run, because ultimately you want to change people's minds, not just win elections.
And the reason why I brought Elon Musk is that it feels like he's the only one on the right who is willing to engage in conversation with, he famously tried to talk to Putin and Medvedev, and he generally visits, he just met with Giorgia Meloni of Italy, to have a conversation. And it's, again, something you don't normally see from the right. You're right that, there was this Orban phenomenon, which I think is an exception. I don't see these things being done systematically, and I think that was to a large extent the reason why the right has not been as successful as liberals were in the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, does the right need to be I think the rest of the world needs the American right, I think, more than the American right needs the rest of the world, just because of the overwhelming influence of the United States, right? So I'd like them to become more sort of involved with the rest of the world.
I think, to be honest, I think both needs each other a lot, but not obviously. America has oversized influence on the world, and you can say the same thing regarding anything. The international left needs the American left more than the American left needs the international left. But at the same time, you just mentioned the polls about Trump not being very popular in Hungary and things like that. But the reason why he's not been popular, and the reason why he's been so easy to slander, is that the entire international left rode in on Trump when he got elected to basically try and destroy his reputation. And that's what they've been doing for the past decades to the politicians and cultural figures that they disdain. And the right never had this kind of ammunition. Yeah, you could have fought, your own battles within the US. But it's much easier to fight these battles if you have external support as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think more broadly, it's not about someone helping someone with money or something like that. I think it's just this, just having ideas that appeal. Because if you have smart ideas and you have compelling ideas that reach smart idealistic people in America, it's going to reach smart idealistic people abroad, right? If you have these things that are very small-minded and very narrow, maybe they're gonna they're gonna have something to do with American culture, but you're not gonna reach people in the world. So I think it's sort of a barometer, like how international your movement is sort of a measure of its appeal. So yeah, I'm for. I mean, I think it sounds like you are too. I'm for the right becoming more internationalist at its outlook, but to some people that's the opposite of the definition of the right. The whole definition of the right is the globalist, the scary, everything is out foreign is bad, and we just focus on ourselves.
The reason I put so much emphasis on the international right is that I think that a lot of development has been happening despite, complete lack of interest on the American side. And again, the Javier Milei and the Bukele that you mentioned are actually great examples of that. Like just the fact that the president of Argentina got elected on a libertarian agenda, waving a Gadsden flag, that you actually need to really try to explain to an Argentinian what it is and why you have this orange, drape with a snake on it, and what the words mean. And still, it resonated enough for him to become a president. And it's kind of the American right learned about existence of Javier Milei just only when he just got on the brink of this enormous success. But obviously, he's been doing politics for 10, 15 years before that. And there was a complete lack of interest. And it's just hard to imagine, having this complete lack of interest to a left-wing politician in any other country. Like, again, Lula has been a member of International for his entire life. And
just underestimating just how, poorly informed and poorly read the American right is. Like, there's very few conservative, serious magazines or newspapers in the U.S. I mean, they're not just not paying attention internationally. They're barely paying attention to politics and what's going on at home. They are very sort of superficial in their analysis. So I think there's a low sort of human capital problem on the right. People can look at I have an article called Liberals Read. Conservatives watch TV. And I go into this. It's just a very sort of intellectually not in a very good place. So, of course they're not going to be international. They're not reading. They're just, looking at memes and watching TV. I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah, and the abandonment of academia is also the reason, and I've always been fascinated, by this desire to just, revoke the idea of going to the university because the universities are woke. You got to fight for it.
The abandonment of intellectual life, but we're a democracy, right? And the low class people, they vote. And a lot of them, on the left, they're minorities, and they have their own sort of their sort of place. And on the right, they're the same sort of ethnic cultural background as the majority, but they want to say in the government, right? And they don't care about international stuff. They don't think about broad ideas. They're very, very sort of narrow in their outlook. So this is, I still think it's not an excuse not to provide leadership for conservative intellectuals. They should definitely do that. But this is sort of just what it makes it difficult. This is sort of the lay of the land that people are dealing with.
But do you think it's like a natural occurrence, or it's a result of the cancel culture? Because basically, if you were a right-wing intellectual, you would just not get the kind of exposure that the left-wing intellectual do.
I disagree. I think that the right, I think the causation went backwards. I think the right got alienated from mainstream institutions, in large part because it was so intellectually poor, and it had to be intellectually poor because that's what its base wanted. So, Trump wins it's like, I was able to publish for a while in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I'm very, very politically incorrect just because there aren't that many smart conservatives. I mean, there aren't many people who are just sort of engaging, who are able to, write compellingly and have, rational ideas, because they keep continually playing to the stupid base of what they, to the sort of right wing sort of outrage culture. And so I think that it's been this sort of this cycle. Not that the leftists haven't been canceling people and all that. I mean, obviously that's true, but there's been this sort of cycle where the right keeps getting dumber and the left keeps getting more intolerant. And
but it's again the kind of incentives in play that you mentioned is because once the right-wing public intellectual introduces himself, like Jordan Peterson, for example, he gets so much trouble and gets so much societal pressure, gets so much pressure from the institutions, and often loses his job. job, like Jordan Peterson did.
Yeah.
That in the end of the day, people just look at it and decide to stay quiet and not attract too much attention, because it's the rational behavior for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's not liberals' fault that conservatives don't have any good newspapers or magazines. I mean, there are just very, very few. I mean, like you go liberal. If you're a liberal, you could read Vox. You could read New York Times. You could read the New Yorker. You could read New York. You could read the Atlantic. You could read the New York Times, Washington Post. Conservatives have one serious newspaper, Wall Street Journal. That's it. And they have a few magazines that are that are okay. But that's it. And so it's a free country. They can they can produce whatever kind of material they want, but they like memes and they like sort of YouTube videos. And it's just become a sort of a no offense to YouTube, but I'm saying there's just like a different sort of level of sort of intellectual engagement and just a lack of interest in ideas like that. The idea that you should the fact that they're still talking about January 6th. Right, like they still want to this is not something that like has deep implications for the future of the country. Those people obviously broke the law. It doesn't matter if some people might have.
Yeah, but there's a major difference though between breaking the law and inciting an insurrection. Different things.
Well, I mean, I think they were trying to get the. I mean, we don't have to go into this thing, but they trespassed. They were protesters. They did a lot of illegal stuff. Why are we still talking about it? Why is American rights still talking about it 3 years later? It's just a very
because people are getting absurd. They get absurd court rulings. A guy got 12 years for.
I don't think it is necessarily absurd. I mean, you're trying to basically change the results of an election. I mean, I think that even if it is a little bit long, like why is that the issue of the most important issue in the world? I don't see it. It's just.
That's very interesting, because that's actually part of the kind of the changing image of the United States, because because politics became more international and because the entire world is following the American domestic politics nowadays, to a lot of regimes, to Putin's regimes definitely, and to China and to countries like Hungary as well, it becomes obvious that there is a double standard, that basically the United States incites the same kind of behavior in the opposition that it doesn't tolerate domestically. And the whole 6th of January conundrum is actually about that things like that happen in countries, organizations that are sponsored by National Endowment for Democracy, inside these kind of events in other countries all the time.
Yeah. Well, no, that part is. That part is true. The U.S. does not tolerate, but the right-wing story isn't that. They say it wasn't an insurrection. It was all fake. That's a different point. That it's a hypocrisy for the U.S. not to tolerate that, but it does it abroad. But we were talking about sort of. But I don't have a big problem with doing that stuff abroad if it's for a good cause. I don't think that like overthrowing like a terrible government is the worst thing in the world either.
But at the same time, there's like 40% of population in the United States think that the government is terrible and thinks that they have a right to rebel, which is actually enshrined into your constitution, unlike in constitutions of other countries.
Well, I mean, the right to rebel isn't in the Constitution. It's maybe historically, but there's no rebellion cause in the Constitution. That's not in there. I mean, you still have to sort of play by the rules. I mean, that I think is part of the definitely part of American culture and norms.
And do you think that the playing by the rules is actually taking place in the United States today? What I mean is like the notion, and again, I'm asking like as someone looking from the outside, but my understanding is that just by looking at the difference of reaction into 6th of January and BLM riots, the question rises. Why is that people who burned half of Philadelphia are being treated more leniently than nonviolent protests that just happened to take over a government building?
Well, happened to take over a government bill. I mean, it's like violence directed towards the process of governance is going to be treated more seriously than regular violence. Now, I'm for clamping down on all violent protests. And probably the person who thinks they should have been much harder on BLM, and probably should have been much harder on the January 6th people too. But does that mean that there are, that the rules don't apply? No, there's bias in the system. There's always going to be bias in the system. I think it's more. It's not the sense of like, it's not the bias is not the problem. The problem is the softness. I mean, it's not like we shouldn't like lock up BLM rioters because that's going to make fairness for January 6th. We should lock them up because they're criminals, right? Trying to get the January 6th people free doesn't help with that. So I think the lack of order is more of a problem than sort of unfairness. A lot of people think there's like prosecution of Republicans. No, it's just Trump. It's just Trump who keeps getting indicted, not the other Republicans, because he does stuff. I mean, I think that's the plainer sort of understanding of like what's going on. So no, I don't buy into this idea that it's just like this unfairness is the main problem in our society. I think that's just sort of a grievance issue that's related to Trump's cult of personality.
Oh, the Biden administration does stuff too, and the same kind of things that happened to Trump and to it. And again, this raises questions. And you just mentioned, the lack of, you need to be harder on the law and to make people follow it. But the absence, of the clear rules feels like the absence of clear rules has been the plan for the past 20 years. And I'm just trying to remember, the New York Times article during the COVID era when the BLM protests broke out. And this is the actual title: "Are protests dangerous? What experts say may depend on who's protesting what." When you read an article like that, that's not the rule of law. That's a preferential.
No, that's not law. This is a media. Yeah, this is a media. I think the COVID.
No, but this is the media describing what actually happened. That's my point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are parts of the left that are. I think there's a few things here. There's the Trump grievance story, which is the January 6th stuff, and they just impeach him because he's a perfect guy. Like that, I think is wrong. There's the grievance of like anti-wokeness and anti-COVID hysteria. I think that's legitimate. I think we should definitely push back on that stuff. Yeah, I think the COVID restrictions were a disgrace. I mean, I think that people should have, done a lot more rebelling. They rebelled against that. They should have done a lot more. I think the wokeness stuff, I'm completely fine with, pushing back on that as much as possible. So yeah, I agree with those parts. I think people should, see these as disturbing. I mean, the fact that the COVID restrictions forcing people to stay in their houses, I mean, closing businesses. I mean, this was something like you wouldn't have thought it was imaginable in America. And we don't think about it enough anymore. We should never forget what these people did.
Yeah, but I agree that we shouldn't forget what they did. But at the same time, they all came out of it, without a scratch. So basically, they didn't face any.
But a lot of the European countries were worse. A lot of them had mask mandates outside. Like we never had that in the U.S. Even I live in California. Maybe we did very, very briefly. We did it. I remember like Italy and France, they had mask mandates outside, and people were complying with them. Into like 2021, and I just thought as American that was crazy. So yeah, I don't know if it's an American problem. I don't know. We all went along with this. I mean, it was just, I don't know what's wrong with people. Russia actually was as far as I can tell. Belarus, not so bad.
Belarus was different from Russia. Russia actually had a proper lockdown for a while, at least in big cities in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Where everyone had to, stay at home and not leave the house.
Was masking a big thing there?
There was actually a gloving thing as well. So people had to wear gloves, and I had friends who got fined for not wearing gloves in public. So that was pretty crazy. So yeah, that was pretty.
Was it over quickly? Because the crazy thing about Europe was they kept coming back to it. Even in the Omicron, late 2021, they were still doing it. So I think Russia, they stopped pretty early, didn't they?
Well, I think in the late 2021, it was basically over. Yes, but still, the infrastructure that they built for keeping track of vaccinated and unvaccinated people is in place and is actually being used against the opposition today. And that's again the outcome of the COVID crisis is that the infrastructure of surveillance has been built in European countries and to a lesser extent in the U.S. as well. I'm not sure about the U.S., but in Europe, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know if the U.S. I don't know if we have an infrastructure of surveillance based on COVID. Yeah, I think people basically have gotten over it. So at least I think we're lucky in that regard.
Okay. So for a final question to you. So do you think that there is an opportunity for U.S. to sort of try and create a grand strategy for its foreign policy or its a useless cause, and it's just not going to happen.
I wanted to write about this. There's no American. There's a right wing sort of discourse and a left wing discourse, and I think I might talk about a little bit more about sort of what the right wing American foreign policy, because it's going to be that means Trump. So what is sort of American conservatism going to be? I think that's an interesting question. I think that that's something that people are going to have to by people I mean me and others are going to have to work on and think about. So yeah, there's a lot you could do now, because there is sort of this polarization, and the president always is extremely powerful when it comes to foreign policy. So if you want to call it a grand strategy or not, I argue that you probably shouldn't. But are there things that you can do that actually can change the world in a small short period of time? I think there are, and yeah, it'll take some sort of focus and energy, but it can be done.
Can you outline in the broadest terms what needs to be done for the kind of strategy to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can basically go all in on being pro-Israel. I think we could basically have them solve the Palestinian issue. I think the only reason that it remains an issue is because of sort of the pressure coming from the outside. I think we could have a broad Middle Eastern alliance with these Gulf states and Israel, and we could probably normalize relations between Israel and the rest of these countries. I think that America can be sort of just more pro market, just encouraging Malay, going sort of harder against these socialists, backing up Bukele and saying, wow, this guy is really, because the U.S. is on the side right now. I don't think they're doing that much. I don't think they're pulling funds or sanctioning Bukele or anything, but they are sort of at least giving rhetorical anger. So I think some kind of this idea of sort of, this, international sort of system of order, that's domestic order, that's criminals, that's people who are causing disruption abroad, just, standing up against that. I think so, in broad terms, this is sort of the vision of what a good conservative foreign policy can be.
The thing you said about Bukele is actually very interesting, because I think the biggest threat that his government poses to the U.S. is that his attempt to get rid of the dollar and legalize the use of cryptocurrencies, because basically, once this system is in place, the U.S. will lose a lot of its international influence.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much that's it. I mean, El Salvador, whether it's a very risky thing. I think to put. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a great thing for the country, but it's very risky. I don't know how it's worked out. I mean, I don't know how the Bitcoin experiment is working out, but. Yeah, another thing.
But it's not about Bitcoin. It's more about circumventing the banking system and the all-seeing eye of the American financial sector.
Yeah, I mean, the American right is pretty pro-Bitcoin, I think. So, I mean, that could be, part of a conservative foreign policy wouldn't necessarily be that hostile to it. It's be more of a, you don't have to fear it. I mean, the American dollar, I mean, Milei in Argentina, wants to go to the American dollar, right? So I don't know if we have that much. I think, the American dollar should probably compete in the global marketplace of currency.
Yeah, thanks. It was a fascinating talk. I just don't want to drag you on any longer. It was a pleasure, and thanks for coming to my show. Thanks for your answers, and it was very interesting. And I hope we'll talk to each other sometime in the future as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was very fun. Thanks, Mikhail.
Thank you, Richard. Спасибо всем, кто смотрел. Ставьте лайки, подписывайтесь на канал. Мой Ричард Ханани. И до новых встреч. Thank you very much.